The Elder's Response to the Soul Defense Protocol, written by Kadan Alast. The Duran were a powerful empire, and the whole galactic union of republics knew it. They were also a belligerent and expansionist empire, and the whole of the union knew this as well. None more so than my people, the Kashora, who had somewhat recently come to share a border with the Duran. After the latter's conquest of the Yerodent, our previous neighbors turned slaves. That the Duran would turn their attention towards us was therefore predictable, especially as we had given the Yerodent a no small amount of material and financial aid in their ultimately futile resistance against the Duran. That hadn't been a popular decision domestically for this very reason, though at the time it was hoped that the Yerodent would put up enough of a fight that the Duran's empire would be incapable of launching another war so soon. Naturally, things did not go to plan on that end. And so the new administration did all that it could in an attempt to appease the Duran, though they were no fools. They also used every ounce of influence they had to try and forge alliances with other members of the Union, in the hope that by doing so the Duran would realize that they would not be fighting at Koshora alone. They also hoped to use the Union's laws to negate any of the Duran's attempts to justify their war conquest. However, the Duran had long since cowed most of the Union into obedience, and while it was well known that the Duran had practically enslaved all of the races within its empire, they all technically still held voting rights in the Union, creating a bloc that could reimagine the Union's laws as they saw fit. As for appeasement, well, how do you appease someone who can only be content when your entire race is battered and broken? No. No attempts at appeasement would work. No attempts to frame the Duran's inevitable attack on our systems as unjust would be given credence. And no allies were soon forthcoming, save for one. Extra Soul Alliance, ECA, the humans. It's actually difficult to remember a time when the humans weren't a part of the Union. Ask any race, and none can seem to recall, save for one of the 5 elder races maybe, who had originally formed the Union before all but withdrawing from it. But none would dare ask one of them such a trivial question, not even the Durian, whose sphere was reserved for these 5 races alone. And yet, despite their age, the humans seemed insignificant. They had achieved some wonders, certainly. The ring world that encompassed almost the whole of the Halifax system was something only the elder races had built, and not even all of them, though the holdouts likely failed to do so simply because they lacked the need to. The Dyson swarm of the Troy system was similarly impressive, and beyond the capabilities of virtually all other species in the galaxy, at least in the sheer number of installations they made up said swarm and the complexity of their orbits. Despite these grand achievements, and they were certainly grand, they had little else to boast of. While they had built technological marvels in many of their systems, the number of systems they had colonized was exceedingly few. Furthermore, their military preparedness was all but non-existent, only a handful of defense fleets at best. And while their manufacturing capabilities was arguably second to none, even before one takes their size into account, warships require dedicated shipyards that often take years if not decades to build and establish the complex logistics to support. The ESA possessed only a single such shipyard. Why this was the case was certainly a curiosity to much of the galaxy. But then humanity was said to have lost their cradle early in their exploration of and expansion into the galaxy, having been all but wiped out in some cataclysm. Thus that they might develop along different paths from the rest of the galaxy wasn't too surprising. Therefore, despite how the humans openly supported us, even joined our alliance to confront the Durian should they invade, it wasn't seen as being nearly enough. And so it should be of no surprise that, when the Durian took that final step and declared war on us, we felt as though our fate had been sealed. Then came the Battle of Ilden, which seemed to be the final nail. Oh, the humans fought bravely. They fought tenaciously as we struggled to evacuate the planet under the Durian's fierce assault. I still remember Admiral Q's words, How he swore that, as long as a single human kept fighting, the Durian would neither kill nor capture a single one of our civilians. His words held weight of prophecy. His tone carried certainty. They would not prove to be false. And oh, were the humans not magnificent? Each of their ships a match for at least 4 of the Durians. Each of their ground combatants matching a dozen or more. Yes, the humans definitely proved their mettle in that battle. They put the fire and passion in their people on full display. And for the first time in recent history, a Durian armada was pushed back, forced to retreat. Yet, any joy, any relief we might have felt from that was quickly extinguished as the realities of the cost set in. For the human fleet had driven back the Durian. It had come at a terrible cost. Most of their ships were either destroyed in the battle or were so badly damaged that they had to be scuttled. Even their flagship, the ESAS Vindication, had been destroyed, all of its crew, including Admiral Coyce himself, perishing along with it. Now the war became one of attrition. Both sides suffered significant casualties, but the humans could scarcely afford theirs. Their single shipyard churned out ships as fast as they could, but the Durian ships proved no slower in their fabrication of new vessels, and they had hundreds of them. Soon the ESA were fielding civilian ships, pleasure liners, freighters, passenger craft, and everything else, with guns crudely strapped onto them. They had many of these, maybe even outnumbering the Durian at times. However, these ships were pale imitations of military vessels, and couldn't hope to compete against those dedicated to the role. The colony of Dunada fell first. The planet bombarded until its very atmosphere burned. Then, with Sarika, befell the same fate. The only silver lining was that we Kashora had been granted a small reprieve from the Durian's terrible wrath, which now focused on humanity, as we struggled to find whatever safe haven we could for our people. However, as the Durian began nearing the inner systems of the humans' colonies, a strange rumor began making the rounds. The humans were preparing to activate what they called the Soul Defense Protocol. Strangely, this seemed to frighten the humans, though none would say what it was exactly. The rest of the galaxy found it odd as well that they would name this protocol after their shattered cradle. It invited much speculation on exactly what had caused the cataclysm that so thoroughly wiped their cradle system from the galaxy. That said, that it included the term defense made it seem unlikely that it was their nuclear option. At least, not aggressively so. Also, we had thought. Thankfully, we would never experience it. At an emergency meeting of the Galactic Union of Republics, a scene unfolded that none could have anticipated. For the first time in recent memory of the 5 seats that sat above all else, the seats reserved for the elder races, only a single one was empty. The elders did not engage with the galaxy at large. They did not interfere with the Union's politics. For a single seat to be occupied would have been momentous. But 4 of them. And then a sense of dread filled those in attendance as the seats lit up, the elders demanding their voice be heard. The Volan representative spoke first, the entire chamber silent as they did. The Durian's wars of unchecked aggression have gone on for long enough. Their current war against extrasolar lines shall end. Their war against the Kashora shall end. Their empire's enslavement of other sapiens, in spirit if not in law, shall end. Their abuse of this body's rules, the perversion of its intent, shall end. All of this shall end immediately, or the Volan shall end the Durian. You could hear a pin drop as the assembly stared in stunned silence at the Volan representative. As they sat down, the Hetan representative stood up. Their language was more flowery, their speech more poetic, but their terms were the same. Then the Kodo representative, who was far more curt, as though they desired even the meagerest of excuse to declare war on the Durian, gave their speech. And finally, the Odlan, whose speech was almost the exact same as that of the Volan representative, save for one addendum. It is understood that the representative of the Durian Empire lacks the authority to make this decision solely on their own. Therefore, they shall have 1 hour to respond in this very assembly to these demands. When this time elapses, our fleets will mobilize, and it'll be total war. That was a threat, and none of those gathered took it as anything else. 1 hour, a mere hour, or all 4 elder races, any one of which could reduce the Duran Empire to mere memory in the scant few days, would declare war. No attempt to delay would be allowed, no attempt to negotiate would be humoured. They had 1 hour before, one way or another, their empire ceased to exist. Not even 20 minutes passed before the Duran representative offered their full, unconditional surrender. Of course, the dismantling of such an empire was not a feat that could be accomplished overnight. It took time. And as the elder races were thorough, they remained active in the assembly during that time. This had all of the other races on edge, and none more so than the Duran, who had only barely avoided their wrath. However, hour by hour, day by day, their representatives' indignation slowly built, until finally, on the day when the last of the oldest of their former slaves were repatriated into the Union, their previous government, who knew only to be willing slaves of the Durian, having been replaced, it had become too much. "Why?" he demanded, despite speaking out of turn. "Why have you done this? For what reason have you come to the aid of these creatures? Did you seek to spare the Kashora, or is it the humans? Do you feel pity for them because they shattered their cradle?" he demanded. Exactly none of the 4 elders who sat in their chairs seemed at all pleased by the sudden outburst, until a small chuckle escaped from the 5th seat. "Is that the current reality, or the propaganda?" A voice that sounded equally curious and disinterested suddenly spoke up from the shadows. All gathered blinked, or did their closest equivalent in disbelief. Exactly when had that seat been occupied? It wasn't at the beginning of the assembly meeting, and the focus of many of those gathered had been focused on those seats. No one had seen the occupant of the 5th seat come in, and yet it didn't seem like they had suddenly appeared either. Rather, it was though they had always been there, and no one had noticed. Somewhat more concerningly were the shadows that surrounded it. They didn't seem unnatural, yet they were. The assembly was well lit. There were scant few shadows to be found anywhere, let alone amongst the seats of the elders. Yet the 5th seat was bathed in them, a darkness as deep as the void itself, both natural and unnatural enveloping it. "Make no mistake, they did not act to protect humanity from you," the figure stated as they manifested from within those shadows, from within the deep darkness, and approached the railing that separated the elder seats from the rest of the assembly. It spoke softly, yet its voice was deep, unwavering, and carried unnaturally across the gathered hall, not unnaturally in the sense of microphones and speakers, but altogether foreign. And yet many of those assembled, myself included, glanced at the ESA ambassador Janice Johnson, who herself seemed to pale. We couldn't help but notice the clearly recognizable human cadence of their speech. As the figure put their hands on the railing, we noticed that they wore what appeared to be a type of armor, one not unknown to the galaxy, and yet still foreign. Then its helmet did something. Even seeing it firsthand, the words to explain it failed me. If it hadn't simply folded in on itself, it would be easy enough to explain. But it didn't. It peeled away, but it also evaporated into the shadows, yet was simultaneously absorbed inside their flesh, and yet into itself. It didn't do something natural. It didn't do something physics can allow. And that was when the speakers revealed this face. Their clearly human face. A face that, looking back, was eerily similar to Admiral Kios. "Make no mistake about why these young ones acted as they did," the individual spoke, fire burning in their eyes. That fire was not passion, not rage, not hatred. Literal fire burned around the edges of their eyes, licking at and falling into pupils that shined with a darkness that made the void itself seem blindingly bright. "They did it to protect you." Their lips curled into a grin. The space around them distorted in unison as it became clear the individual was addressing the assembly as a whole. "From us." Then the figure returned to their seat, as the shadows that enveloped it receded into nothingness. Before our very eyes, we witnessed the individual depart, though none can remember how or when. End of story. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.